Hello, this is session 10 of the series we've called Opportunities. Life can be challenging. Correction, life is challenging. We often don't realize the challenges that others are experiencing, but can be sure that everyone experiences difficulties. We're learning that believers like us can have a positive perspective because we know God is in charge of our lives. We're simply walking the path by His side. To expand on that analogy, if we're climbing a mountain, the steep path is our opportunity to make our way to the summit. The mountain isn't an obstacle, it's an opportunity. This session will deal with the perspective that opportunities are often hiding in our difficulties. Here's one of my personal life experiences that illustrates this idea. I can't count the number of times I stood in the rubble of my half-finished renovation, discouraged at what my latest gut job was revealing. I'd always dreamed to remodel an old house, and now I had the opportunity. I was remodeling a house built around 1790. It was a project that would last 8 years. In one of the early phases of that remodel, we began removing the sagging lath and plaster from the walls and the low ceiling just inside our front door. My goal was to spruce things up a bit, but as we uncovered the studs, we found termite damage, proof of innovative building practices, and a lot of mouse skeletons. We also found evidence that the main staircase had been moved and that part of the second story had been reconfigured in a way that made a portion of the upstairs unusable. It was discouraging. I felt like I might be biting off more than I could chew. And at times I regretted tackling that project. Everything seemed to turn out to be more complicated or difficult than I expected. The bones of the house were petrified, the electrical system antiquated, the heating and air conditioning insufficient. The house had been used for many purposes and reconfigured many times. It didn't flow like we needed it to flow, and our budget was limited. And since I'd purchased the house as a result of following God to a new assignment, I even questioned whether I'd made the right choice. I reasoned that if I was following God, He'd be helping me out a little more than it seemed like He was. But we pushed forward. We made do. We were forced to become more creative and resourceful. We prayed a lot. We worked long hours. We problem solved and self-talked ourselves into believing for better days. Then, little by little, we made progress. Things actually began working out better than expected. For example, we decided to remove part of the second floor near the front door and relocate the stairs to their original place. And that combination allowed us to create a grand entry as well as a balcony on the top of the stairs. We were also able to expose the original hand-hewn peg-secured beams. The end result was stunning compared to the original. We ended up with something much nicer than we'd set out to create. So we began the plan that turned into a bigger problem than we expected, which caused us to seek creative solutions, which resulted in something better than we'd planned. It was an opportunity hidden in a difficulty. If we'd not persevered when we encountered problems, we would have never enjoyed the better home. People of faith persevere, believing that God will help them work through their difficulties, and they believe that often the end result will be even better than they imagined. At this time, we'll pause to help each other work on embracing this healthy perspective. As I suggested at the beginning of this series, although we're covering many of the stories told in the book of Acts, if you read through the book on your own, God will be able to speak to you even more effectively. In this session, we'll be exploring more God opportunities, only this time, Paul and his crew will have to work hard at finding the right path and one great opportunity that was disguised as a difficult situation. The stories told in Acts 16 might be very unsettling for control freaks. At first, it seems like the disciples don't know what they're doing. And in a sense, they don't. They're just moving in the direction God has pointed them. Then they adjust their course with each new word from God. They set out for the province of Asia, but God prevents them from going there. So they turn instead toward Bithynia, but God stops them from going there too. So they travel to Troas. This may seem inefficient, but God's plans only work when He's running them. That's why we can't always gauge progress in traditional ways. While in Troas, Paul has a vision of a man in Macedonia asking him to come help them. So the missionaries take a boat to Neapolis and then travel to Philippi, which is a city in Macedonia. There they find a group of people who met by the river to pray. And as they minister to this group, it grows. It will eventually become a church. This was one of those times when some people responded positively to ministry. So far, so good. However, over the next few weeks, a demon-possessed girl begins following them around and shouting things about them to the public. Paul eventually becomes frustrated with the spirit and he casts it out of the girl. However, the girl is a cash cow for some influential people in the city. These people work up a crowd to call for legal action. That old mob rule approach. It was a cancel culture even way back then. As a result, Paul and Silas are flogged, thrown into prison. And that's where many of us would begin to question God. Why did He let that happen? Why wasn't everything working together for good? At this point, only God could see the bigger picture. Now, you probably heard this part of the story. While in prison, Paul and Silas began to sing and worship. They discovered the secret of complete trust that allows God's people to live in joy no matter their circumstances. As they worship, God causes an earthquake that releases the prisoners. But they don't run away. They stay and talk to the jailer who, along with his family, his whole family, repents and is baptized in Jesus' name. Come to find out, the difficulties endured by the missionaries became an opportunity for an entire family to be saved. Stories like this should be taken to heart. As your leader pauses this video, think about this concept, then pray for God's way of thinking. Being positive and trusting God during difficulty is not an easy task. Sometimes people who've been believers for many years have an advantage because they've seen God work in many situations. However, there are times when God's intervention doesn't ever become evident. That's when the enemy often tries to plant a seed of doubt. He's trying to keep us from exercising faith and from living in trust and joy. The only way to avoid this pitfall is to choose to believe in God, whether or not we ever see the bigger picture. Some people, Even believers who never develop that kind of faith will turn to other things in order to find a sense of control or peace. Carl Jung said, every addiction is a misplaced prayer. In other words, if we don't learn to trust God, we'll tend to find comfort in other things like addictions. The problem is that addictions always become taskmasters and are almost always harmful. We'd be better off taking the risk of trusting God instead of risking a life bound by addiction or fear. Many times a good time of prayer will put everything back in perspective. In August of 2022, God gave a word of prophecy to a group of women at II Ministries. Listen to God as He sums up what we've been talking about now for 10 sessions. He said, "You are my children, you are also my women, and you have a part of you that I made in a special way. I have given you a piece of me that you feel at times and you confuse it. Sometimes you confuse the thinking that there's something wrong with you. It's not that there's something wrong with you. What you're feeling is the love that I felt in the private place called Gethsemane, where the sin of the world was laid upon me. You're feeling hurt, the hurt of the lost. You're feeling their wounds. You're feeling their shame. You're feeling their hopelessness. When you feel this, it's for a purpose. It's for a reason. The reason is to open up the floodgate of my compassion for the lost world. It's not for you to take this on yourself. It's just for you to open up your heart and your spirit to my compassion for the lost world. Oh, cry out to me in your private times. Cry those tears. Say those words. I will lift off the load. I am not asking you to carry the burden. I am asking you to just step in the yoke with me, and I'll carry the heavy end. But I wish for you to feel my love. I wish for you to feel my love. Pray in your closet at home. Pray in your private times, because then when you leave and go about your day, my love will flow, but it will flow in a way that can be taken. It will flow differently than what you feel in the closet. It will reach. It will touch. It will come out in gentle words. It will come out in a slight touch. If people felt the power you feel when you pray like that, they wouldn't know what to do with it. But I translate it into you, into a language they'll hear. Just that tender touch, just that one word of hope. It's backed by the power of my love. It's changing things. It's changing things. It's changing the very ones you are praying for. Yes, it's strong in the closet, but it's gentle on the street. It will heal. It will accomplish what I sent for it to do. Do not mistake this time in your closet. Do not mistake these things that I'm beginning to let rise in your spirit as shame, or that you aren't right enough yet, or not ready enough yet. You are ready. That I can do this with you, and it won't hurt you, it won't kill you. It will touch the world. In closing, you'll have time to share your thoughts and pray together.